A much different episode than last week's Silo. This episode, titled Truth, is just as engaging. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. The fourth episode of Silo is here. After that, just all out engaging episode 3, where you're on the edge of your seat for the majority of that episode. This one slows down a little bit and does a lot of character development. One thing this show does well, especially this episode, and not all shows can do this. Sometimes you're like, give me more information, give me more information. But this one does a pretty good job of giving you just enough to infer without straight out telling you what's going on. Case in point, I'll talk about the flashbacks. This episode has flashbacks interspersed throughout the main story that they're telling about Juliet's first day on the job, if you will, as the new sheriff. But what we get in flashbacks is that we see a young Juliet. She's remembering because she has to head up all of these layers to get up to her sheriff post. She passes medical, which is her home, so it brings back reminiscing of the time that she was there and the time that she, what we eventually find out, ran away from home. What we see though is that she had a brother and a mom, in addition to her father, who they were all living with one big happy family. And the inciting incident that we see is that her brother looks to have been in some type of peril. He seems to be sort of pale in the face, wet, it looks like. And they're trying to sort of revive him and bring him back, get him back to be breathing. Mom is there. Jacob is there. That's the brother, and her dad. They're all kind of there. And she brings a little hand toy that her brother likes to have to sort of get him back into the mode. We then see there's a couple of scenes that happen, and then another flashback occurs where Juliet, or her brother and her mom are gone. It's not said what happens, but they have passed away, and so they are now having to gather their things and send them to this recycling or redistribution center so that it can go to other places who might have a need for them. It's like their Goodwill, if you will, who might have a need for them in that area. Two things are important about this. While it is not said, one can believe that Juliet's terror of water comes in the fact of however they died. Think of her brother, it looked like he was wet, looked like he may have tried to drown. He probably did that again. Or being a young boy, mom would go save him, and this time she couldn't. We don't have any of that in this episode. We don't get any of that. But I can infer that from Juliet's sort of sheer terror of water, this may have something to do with that. Second thing is, in this, her father does not really know how to be a father without the mother being there. Nor was he prepared to lose his friend, his wife, as well. So he is kind of going through the motions of being a father without being so. And so Juliet is the one who is tasked with taking those things down to the recycling center. And it's multiple levels that she has to go down with these, even to the point where the person who's at the redistribution center is kind of like, you shouldn't be doing this. She's kind of like, yeah, you're not wrong. I shouldn't be. And then we see a situation where Juliet and her father have sort of a falling out. She's like, I can fix things. She's basically cooking for herself. She's cleaning up. She's fixing things. And her father's kind of just off, feeling his brain, his sadness with being more of a doctor, not being a father. And not saying that he doesn't love his daughter anymore, but he just doesn't know how to do it. So eventually Juliet runs away. Not really much running away in the silo. Like, you're somewhere in there, they're gonna be able to find you. But she doesn't know this. She's a kid. She runs away, and she forges a note to get to mechanical. And down there, she gives the letter to Hank and Shirley, and they keep her around, but with some reservations, to the point where they put her in mechanical. She starts doing some of the grunt work, things that she can put her hands on, things she can help, things she can fix with. For her, this is her solace. Whereas her father is finding that in birthing and being in the medical field, she's finding that by helping and doing all this type of stuff. They are both going through their pain of losing their loved ones in their own way. but not together, because in this, her father should have been sort of the father figure, but he's going through too much pain to sort of do so. Eventually, after a couple of weeks of that, her father finds out where she's at and kind of lets her go. He sits there and he's like, "Hey, are you happy?" Because he's like, "I can't do anything for you." He's going through enough in his own life that he can't be a father to her, but he knows that this is where she belongs. She does like to fix things. She does like to get her hands things, and if this makes her happy, to which she says, she doesn't necessarily say it makes her happy. It makes her lose the thought of or worrying about or sitting in the grief of what happened to her mother and brother. So it allows her to sort of just go, and she doesn't have to feel, if you will, which is an important characteristic trait for her. She just rather do things and fix things as opposed to actually living in the moment and feeling any of that pain. And he kind of gives the nod. And it's like, okay, cool. Then this is where she'll be. You can take her. And he goes back, and that's the last conversation. Probably not the last conversation that the two of them have together, but the last conversation that they had before they completely separated from each other. And that is the life of young Juliet and how she became down there a mechanic as opposed to being in medical. Her first day on the job, Ruth is dead. She was poisoned. We saw that at the end of the episode. There was no resuscitation for her. She's completely gone. It's believed to be rat poisoning because there was no smell or sense or anything of it, and it occurred believingly on the way up. Marnes is in a bad way. Deputy Marnes is just a mess, but Bernard and Sims are also there, and they're just kind of figuring out what to do next. Bernard is very much like being sort of matter of fact about this, and is like, "Hey, look, we need to give the next successor to both the mayor and the sheriff," which he would be the de facto mayor who comes in. Until an election happens, he's the one who gets moved up to that point, at which point he then says, "When I get sworn in, I need to go ahead and then swear in Juliet," who just happens upon the scene, kind of just like, what the hell have I walked into on my first day? Marnes is very much of the belief that someone poisoned her, but was trying to get at him. He feels like he was the target. He's like, everybody loves her. Nobody wants to harm her. So this is clearly somebody was coming after me, and I need to go find out who this is. Because he, one, feels at fault, and two, he was in love with her. And Sims and them are like, cool, let's keep this as quiet as we possibly can. Do whatever work it is you have to do, but keep it on the down low so that we can kind of move all of this along correctly. Marge then sees Juliet and is like, what the hell is she doing here? Bernard's like, I asked for her. I called for her to come here because, and with all of this mess, we need to speed along and put people in their place. And Marge just freaks out and kind of leaves the room. He's in a drunken stupor now. His life is pretty much drunkenness. Juliet goes to the office because Bernard's kind of like, well, go get your stuff in the office. I'm going to get sworn in and then I'll come and swear you in. So she goes to Holston's old office, which is now her office, to get settled in. There she meets Sandy, who was Holston's old assistant and / secretary, and that's kind of now hers. And she is not a fan of Juliet. Some of it is themes from she not being a fan of anybody from the lower levels, from the deep. Some of it is also she's not Holston, and that's just the way it is. So she's putting extra heat and extra sauce and sass onto anything that she says to Juliet. Juliet kind of feels it and kind of like, okay, cool. First, she just takes it because she's the new girl, but then a little bit of it's like, okay, now you're being disrespectful. He put me here, so you're going to treat me with some type of respect. But the first thing that Juliet sort of Jules asked for George's files. She's like, wait, what? And Sandy's like, cool, I'll go try to go find these files, as well as some food. It's like, what do people in the deep eat? People. Jules was asking with her at first, but Sandy needs to now sort of acclimate to the way that Jules does things. She's like, Jules tells her that she leaves. Cool, close the door. And she's like, well, Holston left the door open all the time. And she just kind of just looked at her like, I'm telling you to close the fucking door. So why are we having this conversation? So that interaction is going to be fun to watch as it gets further and further along. I don't think it has anything to do with who Juliet is. Personally, she doesn't know Juliet. It's strictly off of that woman's not Holston, and she comes from the lower level, which people of that level just think it's the class level, think so low of the people who are coming from the low. I think one thing that is important to sort of take back from all those flashbacks that happened to is that Jules considers herself to be a fixer. She likes to fix things, and a lot of times she likes to fix things in pain. But she always wants to repair things and fix things is sort of why she and her father had a falling out back then. Because he's like, you can't fix this pain that we're in. You can't just fix. So she just goes to find something else. So that's why she's steadfast in this hunt for George. Jules goes to see her home quarters to see where she's staying at, and that's when Bernard meets her there to swear her in. And Bernard's very contentious, and she kind of spits it back. And she lets Bernard know that I'm aware that you didn't respect me or want me to be in this position, and all because I stole some tape. She's like, "Oh, did you steal the tape?" He's like, "No, I borrowed it because I needed to do some stuff with it." So she doesn't confess to it, and they're kind of like, "Well, you know what? Let's let bygones be bygones. You're here now. Let's go ahead and do this." So they swear each other in. The key piece of this is that there is ringing that is happening in the air conduction, their air or slash heat vent that would normally annoy some people. For her, it probably gives her some sort of comfort, and it's rattling. Bernard's like, "We can get that fixed." She's like, "Nope, leave it. Anybody can fix it. Like, I can do it my damn self." But she wants it to be left alone because it reminds her, it gives her some. It's kind of like whatever people ASMR, kind of like a noise, like a white noise for her, so that she can kind of get back to this is where she's always lived for these last few years and down there in mechanical with the generator. Might as well have it up here. She gets a call while looking through some paperwork about Barnes pummeling someone's face down a few levels, who he believes has poisoned someone. He dealt with poison back in the day, so he's now feels like that's the first suspect to come and go to. Now, mind you, he is completely trash. He's 3 sheets to the wind. He's doing this in broad daylight with kids and stuff watching. Jules gets him to stand down, and they go have a conversation, a little bit of a talk. She questions, like, "Do you think this is really the best avenue to go find Ruth?" And he's like, "What do you know about this? You're one day on the sheriff. You don't get to talk to me about what the good things of sheriffing are." Um, to which then he questions, "I still don't understand what it is that you did. What voodoo?" This is what he's insinuating. What voodoo you put on Holston to get him to put you in this position? And at which point she comes clean. She tells him the whole thing. Like, yeah, he came down there. I told him at some point. I told him that if you actually listen to people, your wife may not have been in the situation that she was in. And he's like, "You said that?" And then went on to tell him, like, yeah, and he said, "I'm going to give you a sign. If I give you a sign, blah, blah, blah." And then she shows him the badge. The badge says truth. And he's like, "Do you think that's a sign?" He's like, "I do. I do think that's a sign." So he now kind of understand that Holston saw something in her, and it helps him sort of understand how she came to be in this position a little bit more. It's also at that point that Jules says to him, like, "Hey, look, you help me figure out what happened to George, and I'll help you figure out what happened to Ruth." Deputy stands on the fact that he thinks that someone was attempting to poison him and not go after Ruth. To which Jules is kind of like, "Well, let's keep all options open. Like, do you think that no one had a problem with her?" It's at that point that she sort of backs down. She sees a photo of Ruth in his room, and you can tell that she's been drinking a lot. There's also shotgun shells sort of sitting around. She's like, "Okay, this guy may have been in love with her. Maybe I should just ease up on saying that this was about Ruth. Let's leave it on him for now." But she's going to keep her eye open to say that, hey, this may not have been necessarily towards you. She also asks, like, "Hey, deputy, do you want me to keep some people outside of your office because you're just going around punching people and getting into fights? So just you're being very cavalier with how you're going about approaching to get information about Ruth's killing." And I also think because she saw the shotgun sales and sees how he's doing with the beer and alcohol, probably a wellness check too. Just make sure that he doesn't harm himself. And he's like, "No, I'm good." And she's like, "Okay." She steps out. Next, we see Sims arrive at Deputy's house, and we get a bit of a scene where it almost seems like the deputy is setting stuff up to take his own life, but then you just see that he is angry. He's punching. He's creating a punching bag, and he just starts getting out all this anger, drinking. He is a far cry from the deputy that we saw in the first couple episodes, where he's very calm and collected. He's lost the love of his life. Sim shows up, and Sims this time seems a lot more friendlier than he did before. Seems like there has been a relationship the two of them have, as opposed to the time that they had when they were meeting on the walk down to mechanical. He just goes into to Deputy's fridge and grabs a beer, which means that there's a rapport the two of them have had for quite some time for him to just be able to do that. Like I have friends, homes who I can't just go up into their fridge, and they likewise with me, but it's far and few between. So there's a definite connection the two of these guys have. They sit down and they talk. Sims is joking about his face and what good he's done with it. But Sims just comes in and says, "Hey, look, let's do what we can. Judge Meadows wants uh, uh, Juliet moved. Let's get Billings in there. Let's get him in now as quickly as we can." At this point, though he hasn't told Jules that he completely is accepting the quid pro that they sort of have back and forth with each other, he does allow a little bit of an extension for her to continue to do so, and does so within the realms of it making it make sense, so that it's not saying like, "Nope, I'm backing her. Let's stay with her." It's more of, "Hey, she's not going to want to do this. She's a fixer. She's from mechanical. That's what she does. Let's give her some rope to hang herself. Like, let's let her do this till she quits, and then she goes back down to mechanical and does her own thing." If we try to just shove her back down there, she may be able to galvanize the team, the folks in the lower levels, to kind of uprise against us, and we don't want to have that. He's smart enough to sort of say, "Hey, I know what makes you and Judge Meadows work and tick. Let's put these things in place to slow that down, to at least allow her to do her thing, see if we can find out about Ruth and see what I can find out about George." Juliet meets a person who just sort of, I guess Lucas, I don't quite get the timing of it all or how it all works, but there's a gentleman who keeps just staring at in the cafeteria, staring at the window where everybody goes to die when they go out to test. He just keeps looking at it. He just stares nonstop at it incessantly. I guess there's a timer on it that if you're in there before this time, you're fine, but if you're in there after, it's a decree and like you're breaking some type of protocol. Jules doesn't quite know the rules all together, but she's like, "All right, yeah, you might need to leave." Um, but they meet, and they don't show us having enough attention to him in that interaction without it meaning something. So that character's going to come back at some point in time. He also knows a lot about arts and outside of the world stuff because her name Juliet rung a bell to him, like, of the play, which, considering that everybody's being poisoned right now, it's probably not a play that most people should be talking about of that world. But yes. And then she goes back to her room. She hears that ticking again. And this time, being the fixer that she is, she reaches into the grate, sees the AC, pulls it up, and it's the file of George that she was looking for. Holston had hidden it for her, and hidden it in a way that only she would be the person to actually look for it and find it. He created a thing that would tick that she would go in to try to fix, because that's just, he knows enough about Juliet and how she works, and that file would only be found by her. So Holston, you sneaky dog, you. And then one of the last pieces that we get is that deputy returning back to his home is attacked. There's an assailant that catches him in the middle of the night, catches him slipping. He's drunk, and he tries to go for a shotgun, but the shotgun is in the assailant's hand. And the last we see is him on the couch with the assailant with a shotgun at him. Who knows? I don't know who the assailant is, because we see a face, but it wasn't somebody that I recognized. And it is interesting to see if, hey, maybe the hit was for him and they are now coming to close that loop, or because he is keeping the leash on Jules going, maybe somebody's trying to end him before they get too much undercover. But I feel like somebody sent him there, and it could just as well be Sims, but someone wants him off the table, and it'll be interesting to see if, when we come back, if they actually do so. Because I feel like this is a group of people, this is a community that, when they make an attack or they do something like this, they're going to see it through. But yeah, another really good episode that creates a lot of interesting character development. You get a lot of who Juliet is and what makes her tick, how she came from, and what her family was and is about, as well as what the other side of Marne's being sad looks like, and what his depression and what spiral he goes down, and what length he's willing to go to kind of prove that Ruth was on the up and up. But then you still get this shadowy organization that these guys don't fully know what they're getting into. And I'm invested to see the seeds sort of come down to explain what it is that Juliet, what what mess these upper class people are into. That if you put somebody who is the wild card, named after a wild card, a forbidden story, a rebel, if you will, the author of Romeo and Juliet is considered to be a rebel at this time. She also was a rebel. You put that rebel in the mix with all of this, it's going to create a very volatile situation, and I'm here for it. What did you guys think about this episode of Silo called Truth? Go ahead and leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast with the same name. That's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that plays podcasts. We're there. This week we are talking about Fast X because it is all about family. Like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.